Maybe grab the other one. So, well, I can also talk into this. But grab me the other one if you can, Christine. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Tim, I always kind of want to make sure that, that you've jump-started your day in some form and that you are awake and conscious here. Okay, this one works. And my name is Jennifer Turner, and I direct the China Environment Forum here. I just crossed the 11th year threshold in D.C. Woohoo! At the same place. Not switching jobs. Yeah, that's another admirable. So I figure I'll be a blue-haired old lady here because I basically, as I say often, I love my job. Okay? I don't know if that's PC to say in D.C., but I do love my job. I here at the Wilson Center, like other projects and programs, I bring government, NGO, business, and research types together to talk about our topics. And my topic is, as the project title hopefully communicates, is China environment. Specifically, and right now, for the past 11 months, we've got this 11 thing going here today. For the past 11 months, the China Environment Forum has been carrying out a project called Cooperative Competitors, building new U.S. China energy and climate networks. And we're doing that today. In fact, all of our speakers, they've never met before. A new network being formed right in front of you. But a lot of the meetings in this summer in particular, we've been digging into different energy technologies and reform areas, like looking at the power sector. We looked at transport. Last fall, we were doing a bit more on the climate issue. Remember Copenhagen, that little event that took place? So we were talking a lot about what was China thinking, what was the world thinking, and so we were a little hot on that on the climate topic back then. But then then we started focusing more on what was happening within China in their energy sector. Well, it is on the eve of the Tianjin intercessional climate meeting. We are not losers because we're not going. We're here, right? We're still talking about China, even though we're not going to Tianjin. But on the eve of the Tianjin meeting, and we know Cancun is just around the bend, we kind of thought here at the China Environment Forum, Pete, my research intern, Christine, we thought it's time to get on back to talking climate. And as you see from the title, Taking Stock of Carbon Emissions, Policy, Strategies, and Tools for the U.S. and China. I thought that it was about time that I also personally got a little bit better understanding of that whole MRV issue again. But as luck would have it, Xie, the karmic forces came together that I was able to nab him. I think I'm stealing you from some kind of like family get together. So you guys, this is your family today.
This is my family today.
Now Xie, he's a key energy and climate researcher in China. If you didn't know, did you guys know that? Most of you should have known that. If you don't, you will know more shortly. He's at Tsinghua University. He's the founder of, and make sure I get it right here, of the Climate Policy Institute at Tsinghua University, the China branch office. And we're going to learn more about, it's one of those other climate institutes out there, but I think you're doing some fascinating stuff. In fact, he's got a report coming out soon that's taking a snapshot of the effectiveness of China's low-carbon policies and their climate policies, which is why we dragged him over here today, where he's gently jet-lagged a little bit. He's doing okay. That's why I do my meetings in the morning. Jet lag's bad in the afternoon. So he's conscious right now, so we will take advantage of that. So he's going to start us off giving a snapshot of what's going on in terms of China's climate policies, focusing a little bit more on the MRV issues. And then we have our second speaker, Michael Gillenwater, who's the co-founder and executive director of the Greenhouse Gas Management Institute. As you can tell from the bio, that he's pretty much a greenhouse gas inventory, MRV, that's geek. He's a geek, but a nice geek. And he's going to step back and give it, some of you may know some of this, but I think a lot of, I know I don't know as much as I should know about the whole greenhouse gas inventory. What's the macro picture of it? So you all will learn. And then our third speaker, Kevin Gurney, who's an atmospheric scientist, ecologist, and policy expert, who does work on climate policy, science policy. I think it's a good way. And he's got the coolest sounding project ever. It's called the Vulcan Project. And that's what he's going to be talking to us about today, about how using more concise measurement of CO2 emissions, about how that can be a useful tool. I like it almost kind of Doctor Who-like in the same time and space continuum here. So we're going to learn a few things here today, I hope. But also in the audience, we have people. There are smart people in the audience, you guys. And some people who also have been trying to dig into the MRV, greenhouse gas inventory type issue. So at the China Environment Forum, we see things more as a conversation. I do stop talking eventually. And no. So we're going to start. We'd like you to, we're going to start off with Xie giving us 20 minutes. And do you need, oh, he can do it. Okay. Do you got it? Can you get your PowerPoint going? And all of you, your job is to listen carefully and be ready for giving him difficult questions. Thank you very much. Do you want to stand or do you want to sit?
Maybe it's a good idea for me to.
You like?
Did it work? No, I can sit. That's okay.
Okay, so let's see which one.
Never mind. Yeah.
This one work? This one. Do you want to stand?
Sure. Well, first of all, good morning. Thank you, Jennifer, it's truly a great honor to come over here to the Woodrow Wilson Center, to the China Environment Forum. Now, I heard of Jennifer, been doing this for a long time, and almost all my friends were invited to speak at this forum. And I was, when Jennifer was saying, leading energy environment expert, I was just wondering whether or not she was telling the truth. But anyway, I'm here. I think that's a good proof. I can go back to my friends and telling them I also been there. I very happy today have be around with some of the old friends here and get to know some new friends. I put together this bunch of slides to summarize the major conclusions and major findings. Many of them not quite qualified as a finding because we built our project based on a lot of the studies done by other colleagues in the field. So it's more of a summary. Now also let me just make a correction a little bit. It's a climate policy initiative here. Then just a few days ago, we decided to all use this this name.
Oh, so you changed your name?
Well, no. It's a little bit more complicated background. Anyway, the Climate Policy Initiative is a new organization established last year in 2009 with its headquarters in San Francisco. We do have a few offices in Berlin and Venice, and there is plans to open new offices in India and Brazil. And the CPI in Tsinghua University is a joint effort between CPI worldwide and Tsinghua University. So, because we thought initiative, the word initiative was hard to translate into Chinese, and that's why we used the institute for a moment. But now we're all calling it the Climate Policy Initiative. The CPI focuses on analysis of climate policy efficacy, the effectiveness. The way we did for this particular report that Jennifer is talking about is a very, very simplified version of how we work. But this may or may not be appropriate. But since we have very limited time to work on this, we choose this simple way. First of all, we look at the performance in terms of a carbon emission reduction of the policies. Then we look at the policies that have some major impacts, positive and negative impacts on these performances. Then we look at the institutions, the institution that helped or constrained these policies. We focused on the 11th five-year planning from 2006 to 2010, but most of the data though are available or complete for the period until up to 2008. So that means for the year 2009 and the part of 2010, we do not have a complete data set. We have done a little bit of regional analysis, but much of our work is really a synthesis of the existing work. Yeah, speaking of CPI, I have my colleagues from San Francisco. Kath is over there at the end of the table. I know some of you who are familiar with this climate change negotiations. She was in the past representing the Australian government in some capacity on climate change talks. So that's how we work. Then the questions that we ask for each of those sections are for the performance part, and we look at what are those observable results the policies have resulted in, and what are the policies, the key policies, not all the policies. You know, in China, Denver knows this so well. There are so many policies, right? What are the key policies that brought the performance? And for the institutions question, we ask why some of the policies work better than others. Okay, let me just share some of the major conclusions we have. Our first conclusion is, I mean, a lot of this probably sounds, a common knowledge, common sense to you anyway. Most climate policies in China are so far focused on energy efficiency and renewable energy development. So when you talk about climate policy to some of the colleagues, government or academia, about climate policy, they probably won't talk to you very much because really not a lot of the climate policy per se. So these policies really focus on energy efficiency or renewable energy development. That also means it focuses on the mitigation side rather than adaptation side. The adaptation is still very, very weak in terms of policy and policy making in China. So these energy efficiency and renewable energy policies, in our analysis, has been effective. Actually, in many ways, very effective. Means in achieving the goals and targets set by the policy makers. Right, that's what we're measuring against. Really against the goals and targets set by the policy makers. So when you look at, some of you probably familiar with these results. The major target is this energy intensity cut by 20% from 2006 to 2010. If you look at 2000 to 2006, that is 2.7% cut, and starting 2007 is doing really good. The 2007, 5%, 2008, with the help of the financial crisis, got to 5.2%. 2009 is come down again, 3.6. The altogether in the first 4 years that brought to about 16.5%. Means another 3.5% to be completed in 2010. Then you probably think that's an easy job. Not really, because by the end of the first half of the year, the energy intensity did not go down. It went up a little bit. So leaves all the tasks 3.5% for the rest of the year. That's why you see very much panic in the local government, in the business. There are a lot of stories that we can share later on. So some of the analysis done by Lawrence Berkeley Lab, they're looking at different projects, different programs, and like the 10 key projects, then top 1,000 program, the small plant closure, appliance standard, and so on and so forth. And they also concluded in a similar manner. It's a very, very effective. In most cases that we reviewed, we found that the goals and targets are achieved at extraordinarily high cost. The cost is very, very high. So these costs, including, of course, the economical cost, but also including the social cost. The social cost is also very, very high. If you look at the closure of the inefficient capacity, this smaller plants, the social cost is very, very high. So these together, put the three together, you may say, well, the policies are effective, but not efficient. Okay, they're effective, but not efficient. Another conclusion is we found this extra economic and social costs are considered to be a negative externalities to the enterprises, to the business. And well, you may also call them the sacrifice of the enterprises or contribution of the enterprises, right? Whatever you want to call it. And the problem is that these extra costs have not been properly compensated. not compensated by the government. There are government incentives, but really not quite there yet. So this is a question, who is responsible for compensating this public goods? Now, the problem of this is this may affect the capacity and willingness of the further effort. If we look at the next decade for the 12th and 13th five-year planning, this can be a problem because we're talking about China's commitment of a 40 to 45% of cut in carbon intensity. So this might be a problem. So some related findings to these conclusions. First is when we look at the renewable energy development and energy efficiency. The renewable energy development is primarily limited to power generation in the first in this 11th five-year plan, while energy efficiency achievements took place mostly in two sectors: power sector and the rest of the industry, right? This power generation and production of materials for construction and for manufacturing. These include iron, steel, cement, petrochemical, these areas. This contrasts very much to what's happening to the United States, right? Probably the potential is in. A large share of the potential is in transport and buildings sector. But in China, this is primarily, we say 70%. 70% of the what's happening. The second finding related to this is both technological progress and structural change have played major roles in reducing energy and carbon intensity. This is a contrast to many of the studies that concluded the structural change played a very minor role. Some even say structural change played a negative role in contributing to the emission to the energy intensity target. So,
can I ask, what do you mean by structural change?
Structural change is good. That's a great question. That's actually where the confusion comes from. This can be the structure of the three, the industrial structure, the first. Tier 1, the secondary and tertiary structure, the service, agriculture, industry, and the service sector, and also in here, also related to within industry, right? Within it's the sector of you have different within the industry you have different sectors, and within each sector you have different enterprises and different sizes of the enterprise, and also the proportions of different kinds of products. So the structure here really is like a hierarchical structure to think about. There are many levels, many dimensions to look at the structure. For one example, to tear down the small plants, small capacity insufficient. That is also considered to be a structural change rather than the technological progress. All right. We also find the central government is really the key driver for all these changes. This compared to local governments of many layers. We have a lot of layers. And this also compared to the business that do not really have the motivation for doing all of this. It's really driven by the central government. This is and the major policy instruments of the central government are two. One, the administrative mandates, and two, economic incentives, and both played very major role. This is also contrasted to some of analysis that consider the a minor role played by the economic incentive. We actually found this very major role. Market instruments played minor role in energy efficiency improvement, but played a major role in renewable energy development. And the role of the market has been growing ever since. This so when we look at the role of the market, really need to distinguish between energy efficiency and renewable energy. So looking ahead for the next decade, industry will continue to be the key area for energy efficiency and carbon emission reduction, but buildings and transport sectors will become a major energy consumers and major carbon emitter. So as the economy transforms from manufacturing to more of services, and also the society transform from this production-oriented to more of consumption-oriented, we'll see this part, the energy consumption and carbon emission from these two sectors, buildings and transport, has been going up very, very rapidly, very steep slope. Now, the sixth is the policies for transport and building sector have been effective for energy efficiency, but moderate in renewable energy development, and ineffective for this volume growth control. By that I mean this increasing the total amount of buildings.
2 New Yorks a year, yeah.
I'm sorry, 2
New Yorks a year.
Whatever. That's it's really the policies on that. This volume control really has been not been effective. Finally, the policy design in the 12th and 13th five-year planning really need to focus on creating the motivations among the local governments and motivations amongst the enterprises. This can be done through political pressure. This can also be done through more of political and economic incentives. This is related to performance evaluation, which lead me to the next topic. Then I really quickly finish. MRV, we'll hear from Michael about this international dimension, MRVs. So my understanding is it became an issue really in the December 2007, the Bali conference. By then there were 2 MRVs, one for the Annex 1 countries and one for the non-Annex 1 countries. But these rules have been forced to change or adjust for in 2009 in Copenhagen and ever since. So I think the rules are continue to be developed. We'll hear that from Michael. However, there is really one version of MRV in China. It's never called MRV. It is called the methods or scheme for data collection, monitoring, and performance evaluation. And this became a central government policy in November 2007, just a few weeks before the Bali MRV discussion. So ever since then, this so-called MRV policy has been enforced in China. In my thinking, I think it's really one of the most comprehensive and best informed policy in China. Then I can talk a little bit about how it's been done, but generally, we're concerned about these credible commitments. Here we mean the commitment by the local governments and also by the major enterprises. Data are collected for the local governments and also for the enterprises. And there is a continued monitoring, layer by layer, different levels of government. And each year, the performance of the local governments and of the enterprises are published. On newspapers, on the website, then you can check. It's different. It's a bit different than this emission energy reporting in EIA in the DOE. But it's another. It is a MRV in the Chinese characteristic. So my question here is, since this, in my view, have been working very effectively, and there is very strong motivation, by the central government to do this, and to do this in a very restrictive way, and then the question becomes, when we're talking about develop international rules for MRV, can we design those rules that consider the existing national, this domestic mechanisms already there? Now, the problem is, when I was talking to the Chinese negotiators on climate change, many of them are not quite familiar, with what's going on. Also, I talked to some of the negotiators from other countries and asking them whether or not they know what is going on this China MRV. They neither do not really know what is happening. So I think there is a considerable amount of work that we can do in this area addressing this question. Dialogues, conversation like this will certainly help, and I really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you very much for your attention. All right.
Actually, before we go, I want to ask. I want to ask you one question, Chie, before you move on. Just can you just give a quick example? You can change that. That when you talk about the national MRV, because I'm assuming you're referring to like with the energy intensity targets.
Right.
That somehow that data came from some. Is that what you're referring to? This kind of measurement of the energy. The 11th five-year plan measurement?
The 11th five-year plan, some of the data comes from that. Is the central level summarize, the result from provinces, and the provincial level summarize the results from municipalities. So that is one way of doing the data in general. But there is a very detailed list of what to do, how to do it in data collection, in monitoring, in performance evaluation. So this was issued by the State Council in November 2007. Right?
Yeah, and it would seem that that the fact that they're struggling, they're going for this last 3%, because it seems like the numbers haven't been overly inflated. That the system of measurement seems much more reliable. Right.
The fact that they are struggling also implies, this system is really working. My ideas for the Mid Autumn Festival, I went back to my parents' place, and I realized my hometown and the counties in the neighborhood all have this problem. One county in the neighboring county, they actually shut down all the power. They have a power outage. One in every 3 daes, right? In order to meet this target.
Right.
I know. There's another county, also in Hebei province, my hometown. They shut down all 18 iron steel companies, 18 of them. They're complaining. They said we already spent 1 billion yuan for this energy efficiency, already met the standards or the requirement. Still, they were shut down because they realized this is a huge problem for the Hebei province to meet their target.
They shut them down permanently or just temporarily?
No, temporarily. When the pressure is lifted, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. So just keep in mind that in the Q&A, I think we want to pull out more anecdotes, but we'll move on. But I think that those kind of anecdotes kind of help illustrate because we don't. These are the stories, New York Times, bless them, and all the stuff that we're getting. But I don't think we often get what's really happening on the ground to meet some of these. All right. So Michael, this would be you.
Well, it's an interesting note to start on. Good morning. Thank you for inviting me, Jennifer. I'm going to step back and take a much, much, much bigger picture on this topic. Part of the context here is MRV, as it's now being called, monitoring or inventorying, or it's gone under other names in the past. Is getting a lot of political attention now, which is good. But I think a lot of this is just sort of coloring my comments going forward. A lot of the debate, at least at the international level, seems to be focused on more political issues, more sovereignty issues, more sort of control issues. And there's an undercurrent of debate sort of that's technical, that's related to capacity, but unfortunately it doesn't seem to be the majority of the debate. So most of my comments are going to be focused on sort of that capacity side and less on the political side. real quick, just because most of you have probably never heard of us, the Greenhouse Gas Management Institute. We're very much kind of behind the scenes, nonprofit organization doing capacity building and sort of infrastructure development. We support a lot of the organizations and programs you probably have heard of. The Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative here in the U.S., which we've developed their program for training and certifying verifiers. Probably out of all of these, the one that's most important is the Climate Change Secretariat. We developed their training and certification program for the compliance review teams. For these are the greenhouse gas inventory, basically inspection teams that go in and decide whether or not a country is in compliance with its reporting of emissions. So we set up a program and are still hosting and supporting the Secretariat on that. We do something similar for the Joint Implementation Program for their verifiers, and also for some capacity building in developing countries. So sort of our perspective on these things, just to give you a quick snapshot of what other things we're doing, we're very much focused on building up sort of a professional community of MRV experts globally, at all levels, not just at the international kind of compliance level. And we do that through training and capacity building and developing courses, many of which are online so that people everywhere in the world can access them. We're developing professional codes of conduct. We've got the world's first code of conduct specifically focused on MRV experts for greenhouse gases. We've just launched a new peer-reviewed journal, textbooks coming out, and other sort of professional certification schemes being developed. So that's all sort of the big picture of sort of the longer term mission of what we're trying to do. And I'll stop the commercial there. Challenges, to give you some more context, because I want everyone to think about MRV more broadly than just this kind of international negotiations kind of concept, which is important, but the issue is larger than that, and the international compliance regime will rely on a lot of other pieces that are happening through domestic policies and measures, through carbon markets, through voluntary activities, and just through sort of industrial and government data, statistical data measures. So, carbon policies are growing and expanding. One of the key issues to think about, although it seems less pressing now given the politics here on the Hill, is thinking about greenhouse gas emissions not just as a compliance issue, but also as a commodity issue. In that, if we eventually do end up with sort of a globally linked emissions cap and trade system, then the forecast looked like greenhouse gas emission allowances and offsets and things like that will be the largest traded commodity in the world, which is sort of kind of mind-boggling to think about when you step back and think, what is the basis for that commodity? That commodity ultimately is someone doing some measurement and verification of the data that then is converted, then commoditized and allowed to be traded. So on that scale of things, you start to get a different way of looking at MRV when we're talking about something that large. Obviously, it's right to be concerned about the accounting, the MRV issue, because of what we've seen. If there's a strong financial incentive to fudge the numbers, then you can guess that they will be fudged if there's not systems in place to check it. And in order to sort of check that, obviously we need a whole host of things. We need regulations, we need government policing, but we also need, actual people out there with the technical skills and enough of them to do the work, and embedded within sort of institutions and cultures that make it clear that who has the skills, who doesn't, and that there's a culture of we don't this is our just like lawyers, there's a certain professional culture to that. They don't do things that are completely illegal. So there needs to be a professional culture of that. Hey, this numbers mean something, and we take it very seriously. One of the key points I want to get at is thinking about this issue probably slightly different than the people coming up from a pure science side do, which is sort of in the MRV greenhouse gas inventory world. we think about point estimates, although there's a lot of science being developed that feeds into how we estimate emissions at all levels, everything from a project up to a whole country, that goes into that. In the end, when you're using it for compliance or for carbon markets or anything, you end up having to come up with one number, a point estimate. You can't trade. You can't judge compliance based on a plus or minus 40%. You have to have a number. So that's one key thing to think about. In the end, it's sort of there's a lot of science going into it, but in the end, it has to be an accounting exercise to some extent, and that creates some awkward tensions at times. The other issue to think about is that uncertainty is important. There's a lot of heated negotiations that went into the reporting requirements under the Kyoto Protocol, which I worked on, about how do we think about and how do we treat uncertainty in the compliance process. Uncertainty is okay, and it's not a problem actually to have inventories with high uncertainty or to have individual estimates with high uncertainty combined with individual estimates with low uncertainty and add them together. That's actually not a problem. In science, it sometimes can be a problem, but in this context, again, going back to the point estimates, isn't necessarily a problem. What is a problem is if there's high uncertainty in the trends. If we can't be confident that things are going down or going up, we may be very uncertain in the total, but if we can be more confident in the trend, then that's fine. And so we have to think about both the science and the kind of compliance verification in that light of how do we control for uncertainty in a trend, so we be confident of what both how much things are changing and in what direction. The other issue that it's slightly different in terms of thinking about it is what we call robustness to manipulation or gaming. Basically, are there institutions and systems and policing in place, incentives in place that prevent gaming at all levels, from the ground level of where the data is being collected, maybe at a power plant, all the way up to the kind of international compliance level, and to think about it in that regard. I would actually argue that that's probably more important to think about it that way than to think about it in terms of the pure scientific uncertainty way. Along with that, obviously, is the design of policies is thinking about the ease of verification on compliance, and the transaction costs associated with that. The issues of attribution. I'll get to this more, but there's different ways to draw a box. You can draw a box around a country. You can draw a box around a project. You can draw a box around a facility, and different ways to approach that, and different MRV issues that are associated with it. And then, of course, fairness, which gets more at the political issue if it's perceived that everything from, again, different facility managers to different negotiators, that if the requirements for reporting and for verification are not sort of perceived as fair, then the system's not going to work. Real quickly, I'm going to just step through sort of a broad framework of how at least I think about MRV. There's different data applications. Scientists are concerned about certain things. A lot of companies, especially in the U.S., are making kind of greenhouse gas claims and about how great they are and they're reducing our emissions, and it's sort of much more of a marketing and PR kind of exercise at the moment, under at least when it's voluntary. There's carbon markets and voluntary programs, and then obviously compliance, and then compliance traded carbon markets. And you think about MRV and sort of the rigor of what I'll call quality assurance. It's really more broadly what we're talking about here is data quality assurance. You think about how rigorous it has to be and how you'd approach it in different ways for each of those applications. The other sort of angle that I think about things is terms of accounting frameworks. Many of the people here are probably thinking about and concerned about national level compliance and international compliance. But really, there's a number of different frameworks to think about specifically greenhouse gas emissions and they're all linked together to some degree, because essentially, in large part, they're all being driven by, if not the same data, then related data. And so they don't operate completely independently. And they shouldn't, because that would lead to a lot of redundancy. Obviously, there's global emissions, which we know about that, and that's sort of why we're worried about the problem to begin with. National, I'll go into that a little bit more. A lot of talk now about sectoral or program or policies. Like, can I draw a box around a policy and look at what the impact of a policy is? And that's a real issue from a research standpoint. But if we want to actually use kind of that as a compliance metric, like actually say you get credit, under NAMA's National Appropriate Mitigation Act. Okay, I don't know. I assume most people know the lingo, and things like that. We're actually drawing a box around a policy. And then how does the accounting work for that, and what are the MRV issues there? Obviously, the entity level or corporate level has taken off, and although still has a lot of challenges in terms of just drawing a box around a company, the problem is that what is a company isn't necessarily always clear, and it's a very amorphous kind of form. A growing area of interest is products, supply chain, technologies. Very, very tied to the concept of life cycle assessment, which brings in not just drawing sort of a box around a system, but a lot of temporal aspects to it as well. And can we think about, compliance measures and whatnot related to that? I think, the commercial market is going in that direction already because, product suppliers want to be able to claim their product is carbon neutral or things like that. And then facility, we know that's traditional facilities. That's how we regulate now, typically. And projects, is sort of the nomenclature for offsets. And you draw a box around a particular activity and give credit for, relative to some baseline. This is all tied to what the term of art in the regulatory world is point of regulation. There's different places along a sort of stream of activities that you could say you're responsible for emissions. Large debate on the cap and trade bill in the Hill here about, do we go upstream and cap the fuel suppliers, or do we go downstream and cap the direct emitters? Or there's even farther downstream where, like in the UK, they're talking about systems where individual consumers actually get essentially capped. Mm-hmm. And there's different MRV issues with all of those points along the chain. And somewhat importantly, even if you just pick one point along that chain, you still may need to do MRV at other points because you want to sort of check. You want to know, do the numbers down here make sense if I look at it farther upstream or vice versa? The other dimension to think about is there's different users of data that are concerned about quality assurance in different ways. This is sort of this dynamic is a little bit more focused on carbon markets, but it actually applies at sort of all levels up to the international compliance level. There's obviously the entity reporting, the entity sort of using or the buyer potentially of a carbon offset, and there's usually some inspector or compliance team or auditor that's sort of checking that. This is the normal diagram, the normal way of thinking, sort of in terms of ISO and accounting measures. The problem is the world is a little more complicated than that. There may be actually a fourth party in the term of art, which is sort of administrative program, a GHG program, that maybe the government, maybe actually a nonprofit or other entity that's involved in this. If there's auditors, then who's checking to make sure that the auditors are doing what they know what they're supposed to do? That may be the same thing as a GHG program or a government agency. Unfortunately, in the way carbon markets are developed, in many cases it's not the same entity, and then you have to worry about do the people auditing the auditors actually know what they're doing? And then of course there needs to be systems in place for people to sort of check the people who are checking as well, more broadly in terms of the public. And that's more of an issue of transparency. So you put all this together.
It's a Rubik's Cube.
It's a Rubik's Cube. And this is sort of a somewhat silly diagram, I agree. But the issue here is that if you look at compliance and trading and national, you know, and really we're talking about here is sort of, you know, GHG program or and the auditor. That may be the same thing in terms of international compliance. We're only talking about, you know, one or two of these boxes here, but MRV is really all of this. If you're talking about more broadly of all the policies and measures and users of kind of GHG related data that are out there. And yeah, you might say that, well, yeah, if a company is just making marketing claims, you know, because they want to say their product is carbon neutral, and how does that relate to international compliance? Again, it goes back to where this data is coming from. It's not as if for every one of these uses, someone's going to go out and collect new data from scratch. You know, in large part, these will be all driven by, you know, either the same or related data collection processes. And if you care about one, then to some degree you have to sort of, you know, at least pay attention to or care about all of them. So how do we get there? There's a lot of pieces to this. Obviously, you know, we need to have good scientific knowledge about the emissions, good technologies for actually, you know, measuring emissions and sensors and things like that. We need to have legal systems in place. I think, you know, to a large degree, we're pretty good there. It doesn't mean we've deployed them sufficiently, but, you know, we have the capacity to do that. Obviously, regulatory stuff is you know, spotty, especially at the international level. But again, we know how to do it, and it's just you know, more of a political thing holding us out. Information management, decision and support systems at all levels. At the international level, we've built sort of this IT infrastructure, and it's easy to underestimate the importance of that. But because you know, we're talking about managing so many different activities on such a huge scale globally, you know, even thinking about doing this without modern IT systems is laughable. So it's a serious issue, and it has to be linked at sort of, you know, up and down, everything from a factory down up all the way up to the international level. Not mean directly linked, but sort of informally linked. We're getting there. There's a growing industry of sort of greenhouse gas information management system software out there. It's very nascent and it's spotty. One of the things we do is independent reviews of those systems for companies and for organizations like the Carbon Disclosure Project. And we've got a ways to go, but there's investment going into it, and so we're getting there. Standards, rules, and codes are very important as a foundation, infrastructure foundation for MRV. Unfortunately, we've got the IPCC guidelines at the international level that's really useful. But all the more foundational stuff, some of it's there in energy efficiency. We've got some good stuff, but a lot of it's actually missing still. There hasn't really been. There's some very high-level standards been developed, but very little at sort of the rigorous technical level of detail that needs to be there. So there's a lot of work to go there. And then human resources and education, obviously we've got to have the capacity to do it there. And I'll talk just briefly about that just because I have some data on it. Last year we did a survey, global survey of about a little over 700 senior managers and technical experts around the world working on MRV on all these levels. We actually have data for a 2010 survey as well, but it's just been compiled now, so unfortunately I can't share it with you. Just a few snapshots. We ask these people, and these are people from government to private industry, you know, to consultants to academics, at the international level as well. You know, are you facing a shortage of, you know, qualified people just to do what you need to do now, not looking at, you know, global carbon market and an international regime, just to do what you do now? 84% basically said no. We're like, have a serious shortage. We can't find the people. I mean, even just the CDM program can't find staff to hire just to support the existing CDM program. You know, similar question. Do you think there will be, you know, a shortage going forward? And basically, even a higher number said yes. We don't see things happening that would solve this problem. You know, given that, you know, are you worried about, you know, risks of scandal, whether it be at the international level, the carbon market level, or whatnot? And we had a large majority, 83%, basically said, yeah, we're very concerned that, you know, that this whole edifice is going to come down. In terms of carbon markets, it's important to think about, because, you know, once the public loses confidence in these instruments, then you don't recreate that quickly, and it could be decades or more before you could just lose the option of even losing these as carbon markets as a reliable instrument if you have one or two of these scandals, and so if you think about it that way, then your tolerance for risks should be fairly low because there's no do-over. And then a similar related question we asked, okay, well, do you see particularly universities, out there, making the changes in the movement needed to address this issue? Do you see, training programs and new degree programs, stuff like that, so that we can, at least get people in a pipeline? Unfortunately, no. 82% said no. It's not happening. In part because this is interdisciplinary and it's not, there is no PhD student in this stuff anywhere in the world really yet to even become a professor to teach students. If you split out our numbers and just look at the academics that responded to our survey, it actually goes up, I think, to 84, 85%. So the academics recognize that they're not doing it. Unfortunately, nothing's happening to really change it. And then quickly, let me, how am I doing on time?
You're okay. You guys, they're fascinated. I don't see anyone texting, so I think you got their attention.
So that's just some survey results. I'm going to shift to slightly to the international level. This is just the list of emission sources that we think about when we do national emission inventories. Obviously, fossil fuel combustion is the big boy in the room, and even that can be broken down into a lot of detail in terms of sectors, in terms of emission sources and whatnot. But there's a lot of other stuff out there, implying a lot of different kinds of sort of technical skills and management skills that have to go into thinking about each one of these. So it's important to remember that it's more complex than just energy is the point here. Another just these are more just kind of almost factoids, just because there's not time to go into depth into the international MRV system. Although I'll say a few things. When we say verification, there's actually 3 definitions of verification used out there in the sort of the carbon space, the GHG space. And when you're talking to different people, it's very easy to be talking past each other just on that one term. Verification, kind of sort of most commonly used now, relates to the carbon markets and offsets and CDM, which is, someone going out and looking at a project and making sure that they meet the rules of the carbon offset program and that, that they've quantified emissions correctly and things like that. It's applying emissions at a smaller scale than at the international level. But it implies a whole host of things besides just, checking the measurements. It implies a whole sense of, issues with rules, issues with additionality, and other stuff. Then there is verification, sort of the way I think, in an IR sense, which is just, checking are you meeting your treaty commitments. I think everyone understands that. Unfortunately, under the UNFCCC and Kyoto Protocol reporting guidelines and review guidelines, verification is defined as something else. It's defined. The equivalent would be, is quality assurance measures. It's basically a country checking its own estimates with ideally some independent data source. So it's sort of a self-check, and that's sort of the way it's codified in the in some parts of the negotiation text. Unfortunately, it's now talked about in a different way in other parts of the negotiation text, but if you're talking to an inventory kind of geek or an IPCC person, you can, again, end up talking past each other because they think verification is just sort of a country checking its own numbers. This is, I got a ton of slides on the whole Kyoto compliance process. I'm not going to show you any of them except for this one, although we can go back to it during questions if people want to. So I have them there if needed. Just to give you a picture, this is sort of a snapshot of how, at least for Kyoto, it's working at the international level in terms of a timeline. There's a whole host of requirements in terms of national systems showing that you have the capacity to actually report properly. and then obviously reporting your emissions annually in a pretty comprehensive inventory. And then there's compliance checks, there's true-up periods, there's setting your essentially baseline, your national baseline from which assigned amount units will be distributed. There's adjustment processes to where if the inspection team, essentially the review team, could go in and say your inventory is sort of not up to snuff, they can actually go in and change your numbers. And there's a dispute process for that if you want to. But there's a whole mechanism put in place, for review and compliance that's operating now. And again, this is only for the Annex 1, the developed countries. The little circled red box is essentially what the developing countries do, which is publish sort of what we call national communications, which a part of that is a national emissions inventory, but only a small part, and it doesn't have a lot of the kind of technical detail you would need to actually do a proper compliance review. And I think obviously a lot of the negotiations right now is, changing that, is moving from just that kind of big picture reporting that's just done every few years to a much more frequent and much more technically detailed and transparent reporting. A take-home point I want to say here is again, because we help support this process with the Secretariat. The existing process is hemorrhaging right now. The Secretariat is struggling just to get the reviews done that it has to do now. It's staffed by essentially volunteers of sort of experts from around the world, kind of IPCC inventory geeks like myself, which there's unfortunately a pretty small pool of right now. And of those that are willing to basically almost just volunteer their time, to the UN, very small pool. And again, going back to that, and there's not much of a system in place to grow that pool. And so we're actually seeing the pool shrink because a lot of people, myself included, it's just after a few years, they're kind of like, I just can't do it anymore. And so we're seeing the pool shrink at the same time that we're arguing we need to dramatically grow the scope. And there's not much in place now to change that dynamic, unfortunately. So I guess that would be part of the big picture I wanted to say is, we need to think about this slightly more long term. We need to think about the bigger picture of MRV capacity more broadly because, this system is not drawing on the fact that there's a lot of investment going into carbon markets. And there's a lot of, people out there developing skills, for example, in carbon markets or in companies because they want to do their own corporate inventory. None of that expertise, none of that investment is getting drawn on here. There's no linkages. There's no real systems for those people to transfer their skills. And so that's partly because we've sort of siloed MRV. We've got MRV at this international compliance level. We've got some stuff over here in carbon markets. We've got some stuff over here that companies are doing, and the list goes on. And no real linkages. And these people don't necessarily even think that there are any linkages that are working in these different spaces, even though the skill set is actually very similar. So, and the other take-home point, and then I'll quit, is that, and I sort of mentioned it before, we get really obsessed about the rules and how often is China reporting and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. In the end, what really matters is data quality. All this data is getting fed up from someone at a power plant, going how much coal is going into the burner, in the end. Or you can go down the list of sort of every kind of activity that uses energy or produces process emissions. In the end, someone's collecting data at that level. And why are they collecting that data? Well, they have been collecting that data for a whole host of reasons, and greenhouse gas emissions is probably the least among them. And so really what we're talking about here is, in addition to sort of the remote sensing angle, which can support this, is, do we have the statistical systems, the national statistical systems in place, the infrastructure in place, accounting for all these issues of gaming and things like that, to support this whole broad infrastructure of carbon markets, of national compliance. And really, that's the way I think about it. Can we trust, the data going as statistical reports? And if we can't, if we're not thinking about that question, then all the negotiations on rules and stuff like that don't really matter.
That's a bit glum, but I will take that. Okay, so thank you. No, that was helpful because I have to confess I didn't have that broader picture before either. Hopefully some of your brains got stretched, and now we're going to be stretched by a scientist.
I hope I'm not going to stretch it, but maybe.
Yeah.
We'll see. We're going to transfer.
Oh, okay.
Just
Sorry.
need that video cable, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I was just thinking, Michael, that, because a lot of times, just back while we're doing that, so, some of the debate last year, from the Chinese side about not wanting to, have the international verification, but as you're talking, that, that kind of international verification, that there's not even the capacity to do it.
Yeah, no, if I'm
please,
doing this, I think that's a fascinating point. Is on the one hand, we have this first order problem, which is the data problem, data quality problem, and then there is the second order problem, which is the issue you just pointed out. There's a capacity to do the MRV, right? So the problem then becomes, if first of all, you do not trust the data for its poor quality, and second of all, if there is a MRV, you can't. 85% of people won't trust the people who do the MRVs, right?
Well, let me one quick question, then we'll go to you. At Tsinghua University, preeminent university, doing all this stuff, do you guys train people for
do MRVs?
To do MRV, to gather, to...
Well, as Michael pointed out, MRVs, the big cube, they differ. We train people to do some part of that MRVs, but really for this more comprehensive ones, I don't think anywhere in the world do that. Right?
Come on, Tsinghua, you better get on it.
Okay.
All right. We've lollygagged a bit, got you all set, ready to start clicking away and talk. So you're going to
stand up too. Can everyone?
Okay, you need a microphone because we're webcasting.
Oh, we are. Okay, sorry.
Unless you can yell really loudly. Let me make sure. I've been having this microphone problem here too. Let's see if this one works. Hello, microphone.
I can't sit.
A microphone. Here we go.
I really like to stand. It's much better for me.
I don't think that. Oh, it is. Okay, good.
Okay, you can hear me all. So thanks, Jennifer and the Chinese Environment Forum for inviting me. Thanks also my friends at the Heinz Center, Bob Carell. Thanks a lot. They've been championing some of the work I'm doing within the sort of policy community. So I'm going to give a little different perspective on this MRV issue. It can be called a lot of things, as Michael correctly pointed out. We'll use that as a shorthand. I would argue that actually the scientific community around carbon cycle science has been, whether they know it or not, have been sort of doing MRV in a certain sense for quite a while. In fact, you could argue they've been doing it for a couple decades, but from a very different place. And in the last few years, I think there's been some convergence between what the scientific community has been doing and the needs of both the international and national and even subnational policy frameworks, what they need. And I think we're starting to converge. And I hope to show you something that might demonstrate some of that convergence from the work that we're doing with some others. So I can't resist starting every one of these with my, professorial cartoon on the carbon cycle. So forgive me, but it helps for motivation, or at least helps to motivate explaining some of the things I'm going to explain in a minute. This is a cartoon schematic of the global carbon cycle. It has three big giant blobs. One, as you know, is the atmosphere. One is the ocean. One is the land. The ocean holds most of the carbon in the system. Actually, rocks hold most of the carbon in the system, but that's a very slow turnover. So the oceans are the biggest. The land comes next, and then the atmosphere. And of course, we've come into this system and have started to perturb it. Prior to this red box coming in through fossil fuel combustion and deforestation, the land and the atmosphere had this dialogue, and the ocean and the atmosphere had this dialogue. Every year, lots and lots and lots of carbon get exchanged between these reservoirs. Once we came into the system and started to perturb it, not all of the carbon that we put into the atmosphere would stay there, and it still doesn't stay there. Every year, some goes into the terrestrial biosphere, and some goes into the oceans. And really, only about half stays in the atmosphere, although, believe it or not, in some years, all of the fossil fuel emissions stay in the atmosphere, and in some years, none of it stays in the atmosphere. So it varies dramatically from one year to the next. We understand pretty well the little bit that's going into the ocean. This 2 billion tons of carbon every year. The numbers aren't that important. But we don't understand this part very well, the part that's going into the terrestrial biosphere. This has come to be known as the missing sink. It's created all sorts of havoc within the policy community because it sort of confuses the accounting, if you will. And I've spent a lot of my time, probably the last 20 years, working on figuring out where on earth is all that stuff going. And it's actually surprisingly a hard problem, and we haven't quite figured it out, although we've made lots of progress. And it matters a lot because to understand, or we want to understand the missing sink because it has a lot of impact on what could happen in the future. If the missing sink goes away, for example, fossil fuel emissions will look much, much worse than they are right now. And there's some fear that not only will the missing sink go away, the terrestrial biosphere stops taking up carbon, but it becomes a source of carbon because we start mining through carbon that's been put away into soils for the last 1,000, 2,000 years. Now, here is, the well-known fossil fuel contribution to this problem. This is not a surprising map. It's been around for a long time. It's fairly recognizable. The three sort of big centers around the world of fossil fuel emissions. And generally speaking, the scientific community sort of laid this to rest a long time ago. We thought, we know pretty much where all the carbon is here. Not a lot from the fossil fuel component. Not a lot of surprises. But it turns out that we don't know that map very well. If you go into the atmosphere and you measure CO2, it doesn't look anything like the fossil fuel map. It is quite surprising. This is what it looks like. It actually looks like weather. Of course, this is CO2 against a very big background of CO2, but it's got lots and lots of space-time structure. What that means is in the scientific world, we care about the space-time structure of all the bits that emit into it. The biological bit, that fossil fuel bit, the exchange with the ocean, we need to know all the space and time details of those emissions in order to understand the whole system. Hence, when we went back to the fossil fuel map and we took a closer look at this map, this is a zoom in of that map pre the work that I'm about to show you of the United States. This is what that map looked like. It's an inventory, it's a data product. I call it a map, but it's far more than a map, of course. And it's pretty crude, or it was pretty crude. These boxes are about 100 kilometers on the side. We only really knew these numbers on the annual level. And really what this was the national accounts of oil, coal, and natural gas going in and out of the United States distributed throughout the United States using population density as a proxy. Now, to first order, population density is not a bad choice. It's pretty good. I mean, by and large, most of the emissions for CO2 anyway, for fossil fuel CO2, are where there are people. But of course, there's lots and lots of exceptions to that. You can probably imagine them quickly. These days, for example, we don't like power plants anywhere near us. In fact, we don't like any industry near us. Interstate highways, There's lots and lots of reasons why there isn't coincidence between where people live and where emissions reside. So we were concerned about this for a number of reasons, partly because of what I said about all that spatial structure in the atmosphere, and also because measurement systems were emerging, CO2 measurement systems were emerging, that could measure in much, much more space-time fidelity. And one example are remote sensing instruments. Now, there was an instrument that was supposed to be launched last year. It was launched, actually, and it didn't make it into orbit, called the Orbiting Carbon Observatory, the first sort of truly dedicated instrument, well, one of two dedicated instruments to measure CO2 from space. The other is called GOSAT. It was launched by the Japanese about 2 months earlier, a month earlier. It did get into orbit. The OCO instrument was motivating a lot of us to start looking at maps like this and doing them a lot better because it was a satellite and it can measure, down to little tiny footprints at the surface. OCO will get relaunched, by the way. That's going to happen, I think, in 2013 now. And there are a lot of other remote sensing missions in line to measure CO2 in a lot more detail than we do now. So that got us going on how can we do a better map. So about 5 years ago, my group embarked on this project we call Vulcan, which is the Roman god of fire. I can't remember acronyms, nor can I really make any that are any good. So I rely on simpler names like this. So Vulcan, we tackled the U.S. and we attempted to make a fossil fuel emission CO2 product that was much, much, much more resolved than what we've had in the past. So this is just the transportation sector. We've now put all of the CO2 emissions onto all the roadways in the United States by 16 different vehicle classes. We have 6,000 traffic monitoring sites that all incorporate all the traffic across the United States. All the airports, all the blurry stuff in the background are non-road vehicles like tractors and snowmobiles, etc. This is all the industrial point sources in the United States. These are the things like steel plants, refining facilities, anything that's big enough to be reported, quote unquote, as a point source gets put into that database. This is the combination of the residential and commercial building sector. We do this down at the census tract block level. And I can go into details how I do that. These are all the power plants in the United States, a relatively well-known thing. Whoops, excuse me.
I'm busy. And can you hold the mic a little closer to your mouth? Just
oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah.
Thanks.
Sorry, I just want to make sure this goes on to vibrate so we don't have that happen again. Okay. All the power plants in the U.S., these are well characterized, well quantified for a variety of other reasons. We bring all that data in. So we put it all together, and this is what we get. A much, much more highly resolved space-time map. We do this, by the way, every hour. This has now been utilized within the scientific community an awful lot. It's been out about 2 years now. We update it regularly with more advances on how we put all this together. I won't go into the details of it. I mean, we do a lot of data mining of a lot of data sets that probably a lot of you are familiar with. EPA data, EIA data, census data, just an awful lot of data mining and remote sensing are sort of combined into sort of an IT system to push out this data product. Now, we've done lots of neat things with it. This is going back to the original purpose of doing this was to match up atmospheric CO2 with emissions at the surface. This is atmospheric CO2 transported into the atmosphere over the United States. We made this, actually I had some colleagues who spend all their time doing visualization. They code graphic chips and all sorts of funny things that I know nothing about. And they spend a lot of time making these really nice visualizations. We put this up on YouTube, which I'd never done before. And lo and behold, it was very, very popular. Not at the level of, Lady Gaga popular, but for science, not too bad, right? So, so we're doing all sorts of neat things. We're using this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. These are isosurfaces of CO2. So, you're seeing weather. You're seeing frontal systems. These blobs are tunneling thunderstorms. So this is basically enriched CO2 that's brought from the surface, tunnels through the atmosphere, and then sort of explodes up high where thunderheads tend to expand. This is just a two-dimensional version of that. The movie goes on and on. I won't bore you. This is actually all online. You can go to our website.
And does it explain?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I interrupt real quick?
Yes.
I mean, just the point is this is CO2 from transport. It's not a net because...
This is CO2 from all fossil fuel combustion.
Okay.
Yeah, being transported. Sorry, I have to watch my lingo. Right, there's transport and there's transportation. Just being transported into the atmosphere.
It's not incorporating natural sinks.
Correct.
That may be happening in the Midwest as well.
Absolutely, correct. Absolutely. That would look very, very different. Yes?
And it has nothing to do with transporting in from other areas?
Correct. So for example, if there were sources far to the west of this domain, they're not showing up in this domain. That's right.
Are those very large coming from the west?
Yeah, I mean, we see spatial structure on the west coast coming from the, Asian corridor. Yeah.
And that pulsing is rushed hour.
Oh, yeah. So the pulsing is quite interesting. It's actually two things that are beating on one another, which we call rectification. It's the combination of the source function, which does have diurnal, night and day. Andy Revgan called this, the breath of a nation, which was very clever. I wish I had thought of it myself, but that's why he worked for the New York Times and I don't. And the other one is the transport in the boundary layer. It also, between night and day and between seasons, pumps up and down, and the two actually start working with each other. And you get it sort of it's like a speaker, right? You get this enhanced amplitude of the pumping because of the two. So it's both. Yes?
Could you say a little bit about how you get what
In the building sector, we're using a couple things, but to get the temporal structure, we're really using heating degree day to embed a temporal structure onto monthly level fuel statistics.
So you're assuming that people, on average, respond to heating degree days in a very consistent way.
Yeah. Yes. In short, it's a little. I mean, we definitely do. It's not as utterly simple as heating degree day. We do a few tricks with it. We try to separate out water heating from space conditioning, from cooking. We separate the signals and try to. But yeah, since all the building sector, again, electricity in our system is at the power plant. So we worry about that all at the power plant. So the only thing we need to worry about at the building is actually on-site combustion, which is dominated by space heating.
But
Yeah.
you're not actually measuring it from the building. You're making assumptions of human behavior.
That is correct. Yeah. Now I'm going to get to that, but yeah, in this system, that's correct.
Yeah. And
The monthly data is, yeah, it's fuel data, but not. It's you can't argue that it's right at the building level. That fuel data is collected at a much larger spatial domain. Yeah. Sorry.
You take account policy. So, for instance, in China, where you've got the government saying you can have heat or you can have air conditioning.
wait, can you hold on a second? Because we are webcasting, so let's just real quick. You'll be the last one, Ann, to ask him a question, because it just said the webcast world will only hear like the answer. So just
So do you account for policy? So example would be in China where they have, the government says you can have heating for certain hours and they change that policy. Or in New York where they basically, are trying to reduce the temperature in the building, or, control the air conditioning. Is that kind of stuff in?
Well, to the extent that it is in the data, it's reflected here. Now, this data product is 2002. That's the vintage of this. So in other words, everything you see here is reflective of data that was reported in the year 2002. Now, to the extent that that the data reflects activities in the policy, it's reflected in the data. But because we haven't made yet, although we're doing that, a multi-year product, which we're working on now, 1 year won't give you much of an assessment of any sort of policy effect. But we like to think, when we build a multi-year product, that we like to think that policies will be reflected and embedded in the data streams that we're using.
Okay, so because that affects behavior. Policy affects behavior in buildings, how you control your air conditioning. So that is kind of reflected. That's what I'm hearing.
Sure. I mean, again, if it's in the data streams that are being reported for fuel statistics, et cetera, it's in the emissions.
Okay.
and have you thought about putting like Philip Glass music to the
Actually, if you go on YouTube, it's my boring voice is in the background. Sorry. That is a much better idea. See,
You could still have Philip Glass
I need
behind
people
you.
like you. So we're doing lots and lots of things with Vulkan. We keep pushing out new versions of it that improve different bits and pieces. It's not perfect. It's got lots of problems, and of course that's what keeps me up at night. We're doing a formal uncertainty analysis on the whole data product. We're trying to do multi-year. We're improving both space and time dimensions. We're starting to attempt to do Mexico and Canada. Mexico's a lot harder, obviously. We've proposed to do a global product using a data assimilation system, which I won't bore you with. But obviously, we have to use a lot of remote sensing to do that, and some in situ data as well. And of course, we're really trying to assist or push towards decision support with this data product. We've had a lot of interest, obviously, from the policy domain. Vulkan maps were actually entered into the congressional record. I've talked to the CIA, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we're trying to, we're really trying, as scientists anyway, reach out and do what we can to bring what we've done with Vulkan into some very applied space. Okay. So through the process of building the Vulkan data product, we had a lot of requests from a lot of people who said, that's great, but Vulkan really, for atmospheric scientists, we really put it out on about a 10-kilometer grid. So, in the atmosphere, you have to grid everything. In order to solve the equations of motion, you can't do it with points and lines. But 10 kilometers is still pretty coarse, or at least, what is coarse for one is fine for another. And we had a lot of people saying, well, I want to see my building. I want to see my neighborhood. City planners, a lot of people asking questions. So we thought, all right, let's see if we actually can downscale what we've done into even a finer domain. We called this project Hestia, which is the Greek goddess of the hearth fire. And the idea was to get it right down into a domain that looks like that. This is downtown Indianapolis. I'm sort of both at Purdue University, which is about an hour away, and Arizona State University. And so we chose Indianapolis as our test case. It's actually a convenient city for a number of reasons. It's kind of circular. It's kind of cone-shaped. The meteorology is very easy because it's all flat. And when you get right outside of the edge of the city, you really just go into corn and soybean. It's a very simple kind of physical domain. So we decided to tackle that. And what we did is for point sources, for all those sort of big point sources that we like to think we know pretty well, those are just brought into the Indianapolis domain. All the non-point sources, which is primarily building, residential and commercial sector, what we do is we run an individual building thermodynamic model, which is just a model that attempts to conserve energy in a building like this one. Architects use them to size out their HVAC systems. We used that and simply repeated it over 350,000 buildings in the city. Transportation sector, we took what we got from Vulcan and really just bore down on the city with a lot more data that was really from the local metropolitan planning organization. Indianapolis is very convenient also because the agency overlap is not much. In other words, there's simple governance in the city. Some places, there's 5 different layers of governance. Indianapolis is pretty simple. So here's sort of an example of 2 different portions of the building sector. Here's I won't let this movie run all the way, but this is just we bore down on the transport sector in a lot more detail. This is sort of rush hour in the morning, and then it goes down, and then you have a lunchtime rush and an evening rush, just to show that we've captured, at least attempted to capture, a lot of the dynamics within the transportation sector here. Okay, so this is now a movie then of the Hestia data product put together by the same colleagues over in visualization.
You had a lot more bells and whistles than you two.
I'm always jealous of them.
Yeah, pretty pictures. But this is just to demonstrate what, we had always aimed at a very, very rich online visual system, and we want it to be used that way. We haven't gotten to, an easy user interface. This is still what I would say in the research realm, but we're trying to move towards getting something that is very, very online, very usable. And the colors just represent the CO2 amounts total coming out of the buildings. We have a 3D layer for the entire county, but at this time we only had the downtown section in a 3D visual layer. And of course, a lot of this stuff, everyone sort of almost expects this these days because of Google Earth and Google Maps. We all kind of expect that we should be able to do this. And in many ways, we borrow a lot of that technology. So this just shows the road network. Imagine Philip Glass music.
Yes.
These are all the buildings, residential sector. The industrial sector, is kind of pocky and in little clusters. Commercial sector, classic spoken hub looking thing. And then a little bit of the transportation sector. This just shows that there's a lot of, we use a lot of the sort of tube traffic data, and it allows us to kind of really isolate things like busy intersections. These little walls kind of show the amount, et cetera. So I think that's really it in the interest of time. So we're moving on. So we built this inventory or this emissions data product. We've done the nation. We're still working on that. We've now downscaled into a city, and we're obviously trying to make that better. And the next thing that we wanted to do was now connect this with atmospheric measurements. I think most certainly in the atmospheric science and the greenhouse gas community feel pretty strong that measuring the atmosphere is still one of the best ways, if not the best way, to really, really constrain what's going on at the surface. Now, I would argue you need all bits. You need to measure the atmosphere, you need to understand the transport between the surface and the atmosphere, and you need good detail about the emission structure at the surface. So in the city of Indianapolis, we have now gotten additional funding to not only improve that data product, Hestia, in the city, but fly aircraft over the city, instrument cell towers with radiocarbon CO2 instruments, carbon monoxide, methane, NOx, et cetera, to try to essentially close the entire budget on a single urban domain. And again, we like to think of this as kind of a proto-MRV system. If we can really do this, we think this really could be a nice example of what ultimately a very sophisticated system could look like. I have lots of colleagues to thank, folks from NOAA and Boulder who do a lot of CO2 measurements, Penn State, Ken Davis and his team, folks at Purdue, folks at Arizona, a lot of people involved. This is just an example of some aircraft flights showing all the spatial structure up in the atmosphere that we're trying to connect, of course, to all that stuff I showed you down at the surface. This is the airplane. It's a funny looking one. It's got this big sort of bulby nose cone. This is actually an astounding piece of technology. This is something that traditionally has been done at the surface at sort of cell towers, but we're now able to do it on an aircraft. And this doesn't just measure CO2. What it does is as it flies, it has it's almost like a flashlight looking at the ground, and it's measuring a flux. So it's actually measuring the flux coming up from the surface, not the concentration in the atmosphere, which is actually a very hard thing to do from an aircraft platform. It's a very light aircraft, and we're excited about that. So, so what are we moving towards? We have been in active discussion with NASA. I have a lot of colleagues there. The initial Vulcan funding came from NASA, and they're interested in bringing a lot of remote sensing assets to the Indianapolis experiment. We're looking at thermal IR, plain old, high-res visible, hyperspectral things to try to get, surface materials, all sorts of different remote sensing assets we're trying to bring to the problem to create a truly multi-tiered system. We really are now, I think, the scientific community we're kind of, I said we were working separately in some ways, doing our own kind of MRV, but even within our world, we had not been as connected as I think we are now. And by that, I mean that folks that work in remote sensing, folks that measure in the atmosphere, people like me who are building these emission data products from the surface, hadn't really connected that well until the last few years. And it's very exciting. A lot of us are getting together. There's the National Research Council report, which probably maybe a lot of you have read. I actually gave a talk to them about what we've done. There's this GIGAS effort, which is kind of a multi-agency, it's mainly the national labs, multi-agency effort to build an MRV system. The DOE is very actively in this area. Again, a lot of folks in the scientific community now are realizing the thing they've been doing for a long time has a lot of both spin-off and very direct application to the MRV problem. Now, we look at it differently because we look at the problem from the total. In other words, we tend to want to measure everything and include everything in order to understand any piece of that everything. And so that's typically how we approach it. We're improving what we've done in Indianapolis. We're getting lots of data. We're talking to the utilities. We want to build scenario capability into the system, which is kind of a little bit going at what you were asking. We have this idea of creating interactive online platforms. One of the barriers of data is that we can't get all of your utility billing. I would love it, but it's against the law.
We pay.
But if you're willing to give it to me, it's very useful. So we're trying to find ways to interact sort of directly with the people who actually have a lot of knowledge about what they're doing, which is you all. In addition to talking to Google and lots of other folks that are developing a lot of network technology. It's incredible how much network technology there is in our little hands as we run around, and we're trying to find ways to utilize it within this problem. And obviously we're trying to help with decision support through compliance mitigation planning. We're talking to utilities. We might be able to supply them with a lot of information they don't have, and obviously potentially assist in the world of carbon trading. This is the last slide, so hopefully I'm okay on time. So I would say, I would like to leave you with 3 thoughts. And the first is that I think a scientifically valid MRV system must have 3 things. I think it really must have atmospheric measurements. Of this, I'm certain. I think we have to do a better job at atmospheric transport. That's probably something that sounds boring to you, but it is actually a really important problem that we're not so good at and we need to do better. And it needs to have independent being very important, high-resolution, process-driven emissions data products at the surface, the type of thing I've shown you. Key attributes here, process-driven. What I mean by that is that it's not just a bunch of numbers coming out of the surface, but we know why. We understand it mechanistically. We understand that it is cars and not buildings, or buildings and not cars, etc. The construction of a high-resolution process-driven emissions data product, like I've showed you, I think delivers many co-benefits. In other words, I don't think of it just as being used for verification, but it can be used for a lot of things. And probably a lot of you can think of more than I can think of, but it certainly can be used for mitigation planning, has lots of educational potential, clearly has a lot of commercial value. It can help with energy supply and demand, and of course, it can do a lot of science, which is why we entered the problem. But I think you get both. I think you get all of this by tackling the problem, again, in high space and time resolution. It takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of work, but I think it's well worth it because you get lots of other things out of it. And the high-res MRV pilot has begun, certainly in the city of Indianapolis, where we've proposed to do Los Angeles, which is a much harder domain. And that's going to be with a lot of partners, including NASA, JPL in particular. And we're looking at other locations as well. Not just in the United States, but we're even looking internationally to attempt to try to tackle a domain elsewhere. And obviously, I've shown a national sort of effort and a city effort. These ultimately must converge. I mean, we're trying to converge them. The city effort, again, we think of as just a pilot, trying to demonstrate that we can probably do this and probably do it reasonably well. And if we can, we want to percolate that across the landscape. Certainly in the industrial world, probably first because it might be easier there, although I could be wrong on that, and then potentially across the world. So I think that's it.
Like
Thanks.
China.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Okay, on that note, we have my research intern, Cushing, who's going to, the microphone. Cushing, come up here to Anna first, and make sure you're in the room that you say your name, where you hang your hat, and then we have a half hour to grill these people.
Okay, I'll try and go quick. I'm Anna Unruh-Cohen. I'm with the Select Committee on Energy Independence and Global Warming. And I really appreciate all this. I'm the climate scientist on staff there. And so I think a lot about this. And I've, for many years, talking with international negotiators and where that is going, have pushed the idea of the need for some direct measurements that are sort of extra-national, if you will, an international effort. So I think a lot of this is leading that way, and I think this science is getting close to where we can have that. I know the folks at NOAA have been interacting with the international GEOS to see if it can be incorporated into some of the international weather regimes that we already have, weather data regimes. But I wonder, from my view on Capitol Hill, that's going to be necessary for the politics of, whether China is really filling out their forms correctly and that type of thing. And so, but I wonder if, I know there's been resistance in China to sort of external monitoring, and I wonder if you see a way forward, especially if it's starts as an international scientific collaboration, to developing these techniques in a way that everybody could feel comfortable with them.
That would be you.
Sure. Well, actually, I do not believe there is any way that everybody will feel comfortably at all. In this world, let me just say the point you just mentioned. China is resisting to the idea of this, outside measurement. I do not believe that is the case either. there are a lot of scientific collaborations. Kevin and I were both sitting on the Global Carbon Project Science Steering Committee, and there have been a lot of research projects going on measuring carbon dioxide and both concentration and fluxes in multiple sites, and that also involve not only in the physical science but also the more of the engineering and the social science as well. I think those are the basis for building a lot of further collaboration and also further mutual trust in this area. I think one of the confusion that about China's resistance to this outside measurement really comes from this conversation in Copenhagen when this MRV issue is redefined. In my view, the redefined, it means it's different than what was defined in 2007 in Bali, and that's then we begin to see the efforts to take away the effort to change the rules that all agreed in Copenhagen. Then we begin to see the problem. And in Copenhagen, as I understand, Michael knows this better than I'm a lot better than I do. Just correct me. In Copenhagen, as we talked about, MRV, this for the Annex 1 countries, it's very different than MRVs for the developing countries, where Michael just mentioned this NAMAs, that national appropriate mitigation actions, are different. And also there is understanding, at least from the developing countries side, that only the NAMAs with financial assistance is subject to MRV. I think that the confusion is really there. That being said, one of the take-home message I get from Michael's talk is this is a very, very complicated issues technically and institutionally, and the lack of a capacity in that area is daunting. And one of the take-home message I get from Kevin's talk is, even for this scientific community, we have this fascinating development of a technology. Still, when we're trying to frame that in these international negotiations, we considerably see this gap and further need for developing the tools to do the right kind of MRVs. But I would say despite all of these difficulties and challenges, there are ways to push forward. We have honest. We want to make sure honest reporting, and we want to make sure good quality of data that we can trust. I think that really is the place we need to put a lot of effort in. I think there are underlying assumption within the Western countries, particularly the United States, that the data in China is not trustworthy. I think that assumption itself, it really need to be adjusted, because that's we can talk about the evidences, but I think that kind of mentality is really destructive for the talks. Right?
Well, we can talk longer about how discussions of China in.
Wait, let's grab the mic. Kashin, you just stay sitting here. Yeah.
Could I just add to that real quick?
Well, I just say,
go ahead. Sorry.
Congressional discussions about China are never hindered by what really the facts are. So I mean that's the bigger challenge.
Yeah. I think. I just add to that real quick. I think I alluded to it before, but we have to somewhat separate the political dynamics here from the technical ones. I mean, obviously the drive to move countries like China from their status now where they report infrequently and with not a lot of detail at the international compliance level to one much more akin to the Annex 1 countries. I mean, largely that is because that's seen as a first step to taking on commitments, and so that's the real issue there, which I think is probably obvious to everybody. Separate from the issue of can we trust the data, can we verify the data with remote sensing and things like that. Those are largely two separate issues. So it's important to think about the drivers for why other countries like China are doing what they're doing.
Christina?
Thanks all you guys for your talk. My name is Christine Larson. I'm an editor and writer at Foreign Policy Magazine and a fellow at the New America Foundation. I wondered if there are differences, either technical, political, or otherwise, in MRV for carbon dioxide emissions as opposed to other emissions like, for example, SO2, or if it's pretty much the same, depending on whatever the emission is. Thanks.
That would be you, Michael.
The way I think about it is don't worry about the gas. You have to think about the nature of the source, meaning that you can have a point source like a power plant that is just burning fuel, and that has certain chemical stoichiometric characteristics, engineering characteristics that you can understand how we go from inputs to emission outputs. There's other processes that are much more complex or much more distributed, like emissions across a farm due to fertilizer application. And so you can think about the MRV issues almost independently of sort of whether it's N2O or CO2. It's really the technical nature of the source that's the real issue.
Okay.
Can I comment? Because I might have a slightly divergent opinion. I actually do think it's different.
Remote sensing.
From right. Well, even if one utilizes any measurement that is not right at the source, which I think is going to happen. For example, atmospheric measurements, CO2 is very, very different because it's got a wide array of other sources that have positive and negative flux signs, which has, I would argue, made it such a very, very difficult gas. It's so simple from one perspective. It has no chemistry. It's simple. But when it gets down to the source function, it's really different. Now, Michael is correct in terms of at the surface. There's no question. I mean, look, it's a power plant. It's emitting this. It's a car. It's not particularly unique. But the minute it leaves the surface and you attempt to measure it, it becomes a whole different ballgame. And I think that is one of the things that is so unique and difficult about it.
But, you could say that in spades about methane, though, right?
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
And N2O.
Methane and N2O. I mean,
so
all
it's really only synthetic gases that sort of...
Yeah. Well, I think you're, right.
Okay, we got one here. Cushing.
My name is Irving Mincer. I'm with MEG LLC and with WWF. I have a policy question for Dr. Chi and a technical question for Michael and Kevin. Dr. Chi, you mentioned that China's climate policies have largely focused on energy efficiency and renewable energy. How do you see the Chinese government viewing its policies for promoting the development of nuclear power in the context of shifting greenhouse gas emissions out of the electrical sector? Do you think of it as a climate policy or as something else? And for Michael, I wanted to ask you, could you say a little bit about how your consideration of the human and institutional capacity to do MRV might be related to the push to develop carbon capture and storage? And similarly for Kevin, do you think that the remote sensing capability you're developing might be useful for long-term monitoring of carbon capture and storage sites for either slow or pulsed release?
You can pass it to him. Okay.
Well, China now certainly is developing a lot of nuclear power in consideration of energy supply, and also right now in considering the reduction of carbon dioxide emission. By the year 2020, the plan is to hit a target of 15% of the all energy would be the so-called non-fossil fuel energy sources including nuclear, including large hydro, and also including wind and solar. And nuclear power is going to be one of the major sources. We'll probably think about a few percent, by the year 2020. So from this angle, this reducing the carbon dioxide emission, it is taken. The nuclear development of nuclear power is taken as part of the climate policy. Right?
Can I just follow on just real quick, because I need to know this answer. In the 12th five-year plan is coming down the pike. Right. Do you see? I mean, you're in the heart. You're in Beijing. Do you see any kind of really new, aggressive energy efficiency, renewable energy strategies or targets that might be in there?
Yes, I do. I do see in the 12th five-year plan is going to be critical for achieving the China's commitment for the 45%. So China has to do a real good job, towards the target of reducing the carbon intensity and energy intensity. So, in fact, most likely there will be two measures of maybe three, which is the energy intensity, carbon intensity, and possibly a target on the non-fossil fuel energy.
But you did say in your talk, though, that because of this big aim for the energy intensity, getting that down to 20, lowering it by 20%, that there's been a lot of pushback because there hasn't been the capacity building. You said in your talk, you had the slide about. Do you see that? Is there any kind of? Do you think that there's a way that the government is going to be trying to address that? The
pushback is actually a side effect, as I see it. Yeah. It is a side effect of responding to the financial crisis, where there are a lot of new capacity added to that, and then we begin to see the impact of that later in the year 2009 and earlier 2010. Right.
Okay. All right. We'll continue down the line. Can finish answering his questions. Thanks, Chie.
So you're asking specifically about CCS. I mean, there was actually a recent paper published by some engineering academics about this specific issue, about just the technical capacity on CCS to do MRV, which I can share with you if you're interested. But I mean, in that, I guess it depends on scale. Obviously, right now we don't know how big an issue will be. There probably are some issues with, mainly we're talking, probably petroleum industry type folks, working with the power sector folks. I mean, they already sort of have that engineering culture and in place, and we're probably not talking about as many sites. So it would probably be one of the areas where I would be least concerned, with the caveat that, leakage issue, I should say, physical leakage issues. And that's more of a technical question than it is more of a, sort of human resource or, issue. So I don't think I answered your question very good, but I mean, in terms of, I guess it's just in terms of the scale. In terms of the scale of MRV, these are going to be a few large-scale sites, with, versus like carbon markets and, energy data, more broadly speaking.
Right, but the character of the challenge has to do with what the type of regulatory constraint imposed on them would be. Will we treat them like municipal solid waste? We just need to know where they are. Will we treat them like industrial waste?
Oh, yeah, there's tons of issues. Yeah,
are we going to treat them like radioactive waste? And each of those has a different characteristic set of requirements for monitoring, reporting, and verification. I think also has significantly different institutional implications about what kind of a level of discipline and stringency do you need in the monitoring and reporting?
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. This is good because you're expanding MRV to basically go into. I mean, if you're doing just about the GHG mitigation impact is one thing, but if we're expanding it to the other kind of co-benefits and co-costs, if you want to call it that, in terms of safe water and things like that, then yeah, it's a much broader topic. But we have structures in place, for many of those already. Whether or not they're adequate and whether or not they're ready to address it, that's another question.
Even without the co-benefits, if the stringency is we want you to prove that you're going to keep this in the can for 5,000 years, or we want you to prove that it's in the can at the end of the year if you put it in at the beginning of the year, requires a different, just for the CO2 part and its greenhouse gas effect, it has a significant difference, because that if you put it in the can underground for a year and it's released the next year, you don't have the kind of benefit from CCS.
Clearly. Yeah.
And that, but actually, I'm in the process. I've been starting to talk to CCS people because China is it's the laboratory for CCS around the world now. Everyone's going there, so we will be digging into that CCS topic in the near future.
Unfortunately.
Pardon?
I mean, fortunately and unfortunately.
Yeah, that you get but a lot of it. We have our China Environment Series publication comes out very soon, and we have a whole article that's inventorying what's going on in China, and there's a lot. Yeah. Okay, I think we got Kevin down there real quick.
Yeah. So the technological monitoring part. I would say, this is my opinion, I would say that right now we probably don't have the capability to see, let's say, spatially distributed leakage out of porous rock, for example. But I think we do have the technology, as long as we deploy it in correct systems to do it. I think we have the technology with ground-based systems actually to do it. It would require a network. It would require significant infrastructural development. I think the remote sensing capability is close. Right now, for example, GOSAT is a great example since it's flying. It probably isn't specific enough, for example, to pick up a big power plant. We've been looking at this, and it doesn't look like it's quite good enough. OCO will probably do a better job. And then the next generation, ASCENS, which is the next sort of mission stream, which is more of an active remote sensing stream, probably will be able to pick up isolated point sources. It's the dispersed leakage from, again, a big area of porous rock where a lot of CO2 has been put in the ground that probably will be challenging. But I would say with a mixture of ground-based sensors, potentially airborne aircraft-type sensors, and remote sensing, with that three-tiered approach, you could do it. I think it's possible. I think the detection sensitivities are there. I think the use of C14 is helpful. And I would add one more thing. My sort of pet suggestion, you heard it here, is that we should tag the CO2. We should radio tag it. It's one of the ways, we can't radio tag all the fossil fuel. That's really difficult. But I would argue we probably can radio tag CO2 in a pipeline going into these facilities, and that would be a great way to make the monitoring a lot more easy.
All right. Robert.
Bob Hershey. I'm a consultant. It was mentioned that there is a thermodynamic model of a building. What goes in and what comes out?
Yeah. It's essentially the DOE2 building model is what we use. These are, 120 variables of which we constrain probably 10 or 15. We're constraining them with mainly a lot of public tax assessor data, MLS data, all sorts of local data streams that we mine to attempt to constrain the many, many, many variables that go into that model. Just for an example, it has things like whether you have double pane or triple pane windows, what's the R value of the walls, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of that we don't know, and we default to DOE survey data that's specific to the region. So I would say it's a mixture of some pretty site-specific data and what I call generic regional default style data. We make a building typology. It's about 30 different building types. That partly comes out of the DOE2 model and partly comes from the nature of local assessor data.
Okay, got another question coming here.
Hi, my name is Neelam. I work with the World Resources Institute, and my question was for Dr. Chi. In one of your presentations, in one of your slides, you said that market instruments have not played as significant a role in energy efficiency improvements as they have in renewable energy in China. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on that as to why that has been the case, if you can just throw some light on it. And the reason I ask this is because WRI has worked with cement sector in China on building capacity, and as the next step we were thinking of, okay, what can we do in order to actually after the implementation of tools that help in measuring emissions, how can we translate that into actual emissions reductions, and can market instruments play a role there, and can we improve efficiency of that process? So I was curious to know why the reasons behind your analysis there.
Thank you. By the way, WRI has been doing a lot of great work in China, about China, on this climate change and greenhouse gas emissions related work, and Debbie Saxon and Zhou Ji, the great friend, have a lot of collaboration on. Thank you that's a great question. In this energy efficiency sector, the general response would be the market mechanism. This is a part of the results of China's reform, economic and political reforms, to create and to utilize the market mechanism. It has been really successful in the product market, the goods market for the exchange of goods. But when it comes for the production factors, for labor, for land, for energy, for raw materials, natural resources, the market has not been fully developed yet. So therefore, you cannot really reflect the real cost and real price of the energy, for example. Then this kind of signal does not really work properly in the market that we have right now. That's a primary reason why in this energy efficiency field you do not really see this the market price. The market itself is playing a major role. On the other hand, though, the renewable sector, particularly in this solar PV and wind sector, this is a lot of that is really driven by the market. Taking solar, for example, simply because this world market is not domestic market. The world market, there is such a demand, and there is such a good supply of technology and raw material, silicon. So you see that solar PV sector is developing very, very rapidly, making China as one of the major producer of solar PV panels. Then for wind, same thing, except in wind part, the government played a large role in putting the subsidies and economic incentives there. Then a lot of large companies are taking the advantage and utilizing the market to develop. An area that you talked about in cement sector, I'm not very familiar with it, but I do see that is an area probably regulation is more needed as compared to market, because I myself, I do not really see the existing market can be very effective for the cement sector yet. Right?
What do you see, well, in terms of if you're not seeing the market really developing to promote energy efficiency? I mean, energy efficiency has been pushed forward by government mandates and regulations. What needs to be done to kind of create that energy efficiency
one
market?
of the area developed in the last couple of years is the market to create a new market. For one example, it is energy management contract. This is something that's totally non-existent just a couple of years ago, but now you have billions of dollars in this area already. And the Chinese government earlier this year in May, issued a major policy to cultivate, to help promote this market right now. In the past, the government, put the subsidy and the reward for the companies, the firms who does the energy efficiency improvement. Now they're actually paying, they're subsidizing this energy management contract to companies.
The government subsidizes.
The government is doing a huge subsidy on that. So with the intention to create and cultivate and enhance that market. So it is doing something, right?
Okay, good.
On the energy efficiency side.
I think we just got about time for one more question. Is this a succinct question there?
No, it's not a follow-on.
It's not a follow-on. Okay. Okay, can you get the mic real quick? We'll close it out here.
Oh, I don't mean to be closing it out.
Well, the time is, I've got a good social contact with the people here.
Oh, dear.
You had a follow? Okay, wait. Was this a follow-on? to what she...
Well, it's a follow-on to an earlier comment.
Okay, can you take them? Okay, just real quick. She'll do one quick one.
Good.
Short, and then to you.
My name is Amber Leonard. I'm with the MEG LLC, and I worked with Irving on a report for WWF called Counting the Gigatons, and it compared U.S. and China in terms of greenhouse gas inventories. So I just wanted to say that that's one of the things people can do, and one of the things we did was to try to discover and find the information of which both countries were doing. What were their systems? How reliable did people think they were? We interviewed people, and we did a literature search and an analysis. So I just wanted to put out that, things are happening, and this is one of them.
Yeah, I'm hoping next on around November 3rd or 4th, we're going to have some of the WRI, and I don't know, maybe other people coming to talk more specifically about the greenhouse gas protocol and some of these tools that are going on in China and the U.S. Okay.
Hi, Bob Carell with the Global Environment and Technology Foundation. Many of you knew me at the Heinz Center some years ago. Jennifer, congratulations, and I hope that you will continue this fora process for enlightening us between the U.S. and China. I believe will be a fundamental, and let me get to that to the end. If you ask the following question, what is the world going to be like given 193 nations making public statements about what they would do, like 80% by 2050 and 2020, and you know the story very well. If you run that model, which we have run extensively, you're going to have a 4-degree world by 2100. Most of us know that's not an acceptable position to find ourselves in. It's very interesting, if you look at the finer scale, China and the United States share the perspective of what that might mean. Remember, the ocean doesn't do much. So if you're going to have a 4-degree world, the rest of the world, the terrestrial world, is going to be much warmer. It's just a fact of life. And if you look at 2050, Western China is looking at 3 to 5 degrees C. Central China actually is doing much better. That 2100 is Western China is 5 to 8 degrees. Eastern China, 3 to 5. And those are exactly the same numbers for the continental United States. It's fantastic that we, too, share kind of that perspective. And what I would ask Kevin and others, it seems to me we face a rate problem. We have a tendency to try to statistically describe what is, when in fact it's the rate of change that is really the matter, and whether it's positive or negative. And one of the things, Kevin, you guys are doing with all of your work ought to be eventually to give us the first derivative as to which way it's going, because that's going to be what's important to the negotiating process. So I would throw that out, this problem we have. Then, so what do we do about it? A little over a year ago, our Secretary of State made some statements about how we get to Copenhagen and beyond. And I think it's a seminal speech in which she said, in effect, if we build bilaterals, small 2, 3, 4 multilateral agreements, each of which has different dimensionality, but the ultimate goal of which is to build a protocol long term that will bring us closer to a 2-degree world in 2100, is an extraordinarily attractive. I would argue 193 nations sitting around any table can't even agree on what meal will be served, let alone a protocol. So therefore, it seems to me the two elephants in this room, or gorillas, or whatever you want, are China and the United States.
Be a dragon and an eagle.
The dragon, right, whatever. We need a better analogy than that. It seems to me, and that's why I would urge you here at the Woodrow Wilson Center to foster that process with a dialogue. I've just come from Russia, where Putin has finally stated we will engage in dialogue in the future rather than confrontational politics, which is really if you believe that, the sun will continue to rise in the east. But there is a dynamic going on. So to create that kind of dialogue that would lead us to some stronger bilateral. And so, Chi, I would ask if you see a prospect for stronger bilateral agreements between our nations It might be on MRV, it might be on a broader scale, it might be in some other dimensionality to get started. But it would seem to me, gathered in this room are people who would see that as a really powerful step forward so that Cancun and all of the comps thereafter begin to look more attractive. Because if in the end we have enough of these smaller bilaterals, we'll wake up one day and say we've done it. And we will not have had to do it among 193 nations. We'll have done it in a sort of sub-level. But I would argue that China and the United States have the leadership potential. They are the biggest players in the game. And then the Woodrow Wilson Center, continuing these kind of dialogue processes or fora, whatever, might very well be a facilitating process. And if we can start bringing some of our policymakers, both in legislative and executive branch, into this room, we might make some progress.
Okay. Chie.
Well, first of all, let me also thank you for the great comments and great, even greater question. I also want to thank my friend Dennis Ojima and the Heinz Center, and who have helped this to happen. I really appreciate this opportunity. And I share your passion and your reasoning of the issue. I do believe between the two elephant or two whatever, China and the U.S., we have more than 40% of all the world emissions, and absolutely that both China and the United States have to do better in order to save the world. I share that vision with you. And if we were talking about this subject, this issue a year ago, we are a lot more optimistic last year, this month. Then after Copenhagen, the future and prospect is a lot more pessimistic, and there's no question about that. And I think this kind of collaboration, aim to build the mutual trust and on the issue and to find the common solutions to the issue. Start with some smaller scale project is a good idea, and U.S. and China jointly declared to set up this joint R&D center on clean energy on 3 different aspects: CCS, buildings, and electric vehicles part. I think that's a great idea. Then the problem comes a lot of very specific issues, and where the funding comes from. Jointly, that's a relatively small project altogether. Than $150 million U.S. in 5 years, and shared by 2 countries. That's not a lot of money. And I have to say, from the Chinese government side, that the political will and support is there, and the money is sitting there, and the people are there. But we, as far as we have friends from DOE here, can correct me. But from this side, the funding has been an issue, because this kind of allocation probably have to be approved, by the Congress or other kind of procedures. I mean, it's been a year. It's been almost a year. This is something declared by President Hu Jintao, President Obama last November, but still we have not really seen a good progress in that. I think start something small and continue to build on that is really what's needed at this point. We need to build the trust, the mutual trust in that area, and this kind of effort certainly helps. I also appreciate this kind of forum here and the project under the CEF. I think that's exactly helping to push that dialogue forward. We have to get out this